Sif, the great grey wolf, is guarding a grave. For hundreds of years, she stood watch over the resting place of Artorias the Abysswalker, the greatest knight who ever lived. She's alone, she's waiting, and when you approach, she picks up a sword in her mouth and attacks you. Not because she's evil, but because she's protecting the ring that lets you walk the abyss. She knows what the abyss does to people. She saw it happen to Artorias, and she doesn't want it to happen to you. But here's the thing, if you play the DLC first and save Sif as a puppy from the Chasm of the Abyss, she remembers you. When you fight her in the present, there's an alternate cutscene. She recognizes you. She hesitates. She whimpers. But she still attacks, because protecting Artorias' legacy is all she has left. This is the complete story of Sif and Artorias, and you'll learn why killing Sif is the saddest boss fight in gaming history. When you first stumble into the heart of the Darkroot Garden, the atmosphere shifts from the tangled woods to a place of somber reverence. You find yourself in a large moonlit clearing, dominated by a massive tombstone and a field of swords driven into the earth. This is the final resting place of a legendary hero. But as you approach the grave, a massive great grey wolf leaps from behind the monument. This is Sif. The encounter is framed by a cinematic that defines the emotional weight of the series. Sif does not growl like a common beast. The wolf picks up a massive greatsword in its mouth and stands in a defensive posture. The entire setting suggests a loyal companion fulfilling a sacred, centuries-old duty. Sif is not guarding treasure or territory. The wolf is protecting the legacy of a fallen master. Every sword in the ground represents a traveler who tried to disturb this peace and failed. The moon provides the only light for this eternal vigil. It is a scene of quiet, dignified mourning that has lasted longer than most kingdoms. Sif is the silent sentinel of a memory that the rest of the world has forgotten. For the player, the first encounter is often one of intimidation. Sif is huge, fast, wields a blade that was clearly forged for a human hand. The wolf moves with a fluid, lethal grace that proves it was trained by a master swordsman. But beneath the aggression, there is a deep sense of purpose. Sif is the barrier between the player and a tragic secret. To get what you need, you have to desecrate a grave. You have to face the one creature in the world that still remembers what true loyalty looks like. Sif represents the purity of a bond that survived the collapse of an era. While the gods fled and the humans turned into mindless shells, the wolf stayed. This is not a mindless animal protecting a den. This is a battle partner maintaining a vigil over a tomb. The sword in Sif's mouth is the primary tool of that duty. It is a weapon that was never meant to be used by a wolf, yet Sif has mastered it through sheer devotion. The clearing is a sanctuary of honor in a world that has become a nightmare. This introduction sets the stage for a story that will eventually break the player's heart. You are the intruder in this sanctuary. You are the one who is coming to take the only thing Sif has left. The fight with Sif is not a struggle against a monster. It is a confrontation with a guardian of the past. As the music swells with a mournful, operatic tone, you realize that you are about to participate in the end of a legend. The wolf guarding the grave is the last honorable thing left in a land of hollows. Artorias was one of the 4 knights of Gwyn, the elite warriors who served the Lord of Sunlight during the height of his power. He was a master swordsman, known for his indomitable will and his unwavering sense of justice. In a court filled with intrigue and ambition, Artorias was the paragon of heroism. He was the symbol of resistance against the forces of the dark. His legend was built on the claim that he single-handedly defeated the Abyss, earning him the title of Abysswalker. He was the knight that every aspiring warrior in Lordran wanted to be. His reputation was so great that it survived for 1,000 years after his disappearance. He was believed to be a divine force that could walk through the void without being consumed. The stories told of a hero who could face the primordial darkness and emerge with his soul intact. This myth provided hope for a world that was slowly being swallowed by the fading of the fire. Artorias was the proof that humanity could overcome its own nature through discipline and faith. He was the golden shield against the encroaching night. However, the legend of Artorias was a beautiful lie designed to mask a horrific tragedy. The real Artorias was a man who pushed himself to the absolute limit for the sake of his people and his companion. He was not a god. He was a warrior who was eventually broken by the very thing he sought to destroy. His indomitable will was real, but even the strongest will can be snapped by the weight of the abyss. The stories about him were polished by history to hide the fact that he was a victim of a mission that was doomed from the start. Artorias was also defined by his deep connection to Sif. He did not treat the wolf as a pet or a tool of war. They were peers. They were a singular unit on the battlefield. The Knight of Gwyn and his great grey wolf were a sight that brought terror to the enemies of the sun. This bond was the one part of his life that the abyss couldn't fully corrupt. Even at his lowest point, his thoughts remained with the safety of his friend. His heroism was not just in his swordplay, but in his capacity for self-sacrifice. Understanding the greatness of Artorias is essential to understanding the tragedy of Sif. The wolf is not just guarding a knight, it is guarding the memory of the greatest man it ever knew. Sif remembers the hero that the world only knows through tall tales. When you stand at the grave in the Darkroot Garden, you are standing at the end of a 1,000-year-old story of a man who gave everything and the wolf who stayed to tell the tale. Artorias was a hero, but his greatest achievement was the loyalty he inspired in his companion. Sif was more than just a companion to Artorias. The wolf was an extension of his will. From a young age, Sif was a creature of unusual size and terrifying intelligence. The bond between the knight and the wolf was legendary among the 4 knights of Gwyn. They were never seen apart. While other knights relied on their armor or their spells, Artorias relied on the silver-furred beast that fought at his side. Sif was a true battle partner, capable of holding the front lines against the forces of humanity gone hollow. They shared the same sense of duty and the same unbreakable spirit. In combat, Sif and Artorias were a whirlwind of steel and fur. The wolf's natural agility complemented the knight's heavy swordplay. They trained together until their movements were perfectly synchronized. This was not a master commanding a beast. It was a conversation between 2 warriors who knew each other's hearts. Sif understood the complexities of war and the weight of the oaths they had taken. The wolf was a witness to the glory of the Age of Fire. Sif saw Artorias at his best, and eventually at his worst. Sif's intelligence is what makes the Guardian role so poignant. This is not an animal acting on instinct. Sif remembers the conversations, the plans, and the final desperate moments in the dark. The wolf knows exactly what happened in the abyss. Sif understands that the legend of the Abysswalker is a fabrication. This knowledge is a heavy burden to carry for 1,000 years. Sif is the keeper of the truth in a world that thrives on myth. The wolf's solitary life in the forest is a choice made out of a desire to protect the honor of a fallen friend. The physical presence of Sif is also a symbol of a lost era. The great grey wolf is a creature that seems out of place in the cramped, rotting halls of the present day. Sif belongs to the age of giants and gods. By the time the player meets Sif, the wolf has grown to a massive size, likely through the influence of the forest's magic or the lingering power of the night. Sif is a living relic. The wolf is the last surviving member of Artorias' inner circle. To kill Sif is to kill the last living connection to the four knights of Gwyn. Every action Sif takes is defined by the memory of Artorias. The way the wolf picks up the sword, the way it defends the grave, and even the way it looks at the player. It is all filtered through the lens of that ancient friendship. Sif is the personification of absolute loyalty. In a world defined by betrayal and the hollow abandonment of purpose, Sif is a constant. The wolf didn't stay because it was told to. Sif stayed because there was nowhere else in the world that mattered as much as the spot where Artorias was laid to rest. The tragedy began when the ancient city of Ulakile was consumed by the abyss. This was not a natural disaster. It was caused by the residents of the city digging into the earth and awakening Manus, the father of the abyss. The darkness that emerged was a corrosive, sentient force that twisted everything it touched, as it turned the citizens into bloated monsters and threatened to spread across all of Lordran. Lord Gwyn, desperate to stop the spread of the dark, sent his most trusted knight to handle the crisis. Artorias was chosen for the mission because of his legendary will. Artorias did not go alone. He brought Sif with him into the heart of the corruption. He knew the mission would be the most dangerous task he had ever faced, but he had total confidence in their combined strength. They traveled to the beautiful, white stone city of Ulakile, only to find it a nightmare of madness and screams. The abyss was not just a lack of light, it was a physical weight that pressed down on the mind. As they moved through the streets, they saw the horrors that the dark could inflict on the human soul. It was a war they were not prepared to fight. The journey to Ulakile was a one-way trip for Artorias. As they descended deeper into the earth, the environment became increasingly hostile. The very air was filled with humanity phantoms, the spirits of the dead that seek to drag the living into the void. Sif and Artorias fought side by side against an endless tide of darkness. They were the last defenders of the light in a place where the sun had been forgotten. The mission was no longer about saving a city. It was about surviving a nightmare that was actively trying to consume them. Artorias knew he was losing ground. The abyss was beginning to find the cracks in his armor. He could feel the corruption seeping into his mind, whispering of the futility of his quest. But he kept moving forward because he had Sif at his side. He believed that together, they could reach the source of the dark and end the threat. His focus was entirely on the mission and the protection of his companion. He didn't realize that he was walking into a trap set by the father of the abyss himself. This journey is the starting point for Sif's eternal trauma. The wolf saw the city fall. Sif watched as the strongest man in the world began to falter. The sights and sounds of Ulakile remained with Sif for 1,000 years, a constant reminder of the cost of duty. The mission to stop the abyss was the moment the legend was born and the hero was lost. For Sif, The journey to Ulakaile was the beginning of a long, dark road that would eventually lead back to a lonely grave in the forest. The final descent into the chasm of the abyss was the point of no return. This was the womb of the darkness, a place where the rules of the physical world no longer applied. It was a realm of pure dark, where the floor was made of shadows and the walls were filled with the swirling phantoms of lost humanity. The environment was an active predator. It ate away at the soul, eroding the identity of anyone who dared to enter. For a knight of the sun like Artorias, the chasm was the ultimate hell. He was a creature of light, drowning in a sea of ink. As Artorias and Sif moved through the chasm, the weight of the abyss became unbearable. Artorias' left arm was shattered during the initial skirmishes, leaving him unable to use his great shield properly. He was forced to fight with a single hand, his movements becoming more desperate and erratic. Sif, still young and vulnerable, she struggled to stay upright in the suffocating dark. They were being hunted by the very essence of the abyss. The phantoms of the dead swarmed them, looking for a way to extinguish the flickering light of their spirits. The sheer magnitude of the abyss was far greater than anything Artorias had faced in New Lundo. It was not just a flood of water or a group of rogue knights. It was a primordial force that existed before the Age of Fire. Artorias realized that his divine power was useless here. His sword could cut the flesh of monsters, but it couldn't stop the spread of the void. He was a hero realized in the wrong era. The chasm was a place where honor was meaningless, and duty was a death sentence. The psychological toll on Artorias was total. He could feel his memories slipping away, replaced by the cold, empty hunger of the dark. He knew that he was becoming the thing he hated. But even as his mind began to fracture, his instinct to protect Sif remained. He looked at the young wolf whimpering in the shadows and realized that they were not going to both make it out. The descent into the chasm had turned from a heroic mission into a desperate struggle for the survival of a single life. This descent is the core of the tragedy. Artorias didn't just die, he was unmade. He was stripped of his armor, his dignity, and his soul. Sif watched the entire process. The wolf saw the light go out of the knight's eyes. The chasm was the site of the greatest defeat in history, and Sif was the only witness. The memory of that dark, hollowed-out place is what fuels Sif's aggression in the present day. Sif knows what the abyss does to people, and the wolf will do anything to stop anyone from ever going back there. At the bottom of the chasm, they finally encountered Manus, the father of the abyss. Manus was a primordial human whose soul had been agitated into a monstrous, raging entity. He was the source of the corruption, a creature of absolute strength and chaotic magic. The battle was short and brutal. Artorias, already weakened by the descent and his shattered arm, stood no chance. His divine will and his legendary resistance were snapped like dry wood. Manus overwhelmed him with a ferocity that surpassed anything in the annals of knightly history. The defeat of Artorias was the end of the Age of Heroes. He was the best the gods had to offer, and he was swatted aside like an insect. Manus's dark magic bypassed his defenses and began to feed on his soul. Artorias felt the last of his sunlight being drained away. His left arm, the one he used to hold his shield, was useless and broken. He was a knight who could no longer defend himself or his friend. The Abysswalker was a failure. He had walked into the dark, and he was never going to walk out. As Artorias lay broken on the floor of the chasm, He watched the darkness closing in on Sif. Manus was not done. The abyss wanted to consume everything in the chamber. Artorias knew that in a few moments, he would be a mindless hollow, a puppet of the dark. He knew that if he didn't act immediately, Sif would suffer a fate far worse than death. The realization of his failure was a crushing weight, but it gave him one final, desperate burst of clarity. He had failed the mission. He had failed his lord, but he refused to fail his wolf. The loss of Artorias is the moment the world truly began to die. When the greatest night fell, it sent a signal that the dark was unstoppable. But in the midst of this cosmic defeat, a small and deeply human act of love occurred. Artorias looked at the young Sif and made a choice that would define the next 1,000 years. He gave up his last line of defense. He discarded the only thing that could have kept him sane for the sake of a creature that couldn't even thank him. This battle is the secret history that the player eventually uncovers. The legend says Artorias defeated Manus, but the truth is that Manus defeated the world. The only thing that survived the chasm was the wolf, and that survival came at a cost that the player is eventually forced to pay. Artorias lost the fight, he lost his mind, and he lost his life. But he saved his soul through the one act of sacrifice that the abyss could not touch. He proved that even in total defeat, there is still room for love. Knowing that he was about to be completely corrupted by the dark, Artorias performed his final and most selfless act. He took his great shield, a massive silver relic inscribed with his own name, and placed it over the young Sif. He wasn't using it to fight. He was using it to create a sanctuary. He poured the last of his divine energy into the shield, casting a protective barrier that warded off the corrosive magic of the abyss. He locked Sif inside a sphere of light, ensuring that the wolf would remain pure even as the world around them turned to rot. This sacrifice was a tactical suicide. By giving up his shield, Artorias left himself completely vulnerable to the influence of Manus. Without the barrier of the Great Shield, the abyss flooded his mind and body instantly. His soul was permanently stained, and he became the mindless, shrieking warrior that the player eventually fights in Ulashil. He traded his sanity for Sif's life. He chose to become a monster so that his friend could remain a wolf. It was the most noble act in the history of Lordran, and it happened in a place where no one was meant to see it. The Great Shield of Artorias is more than just a piece of armor. It is a symbol of the knight's true character. The item description in the game notes that the shield warded off the abyss to protect his comrade. This one sentence carries the weight of the entire tragedy. Artorias didn't use his power to become a god or to conquer his enemies. He used it to save a companion. The shield became a tomb and a sanctuary all at once, a silver shell in a world of ink. Sif was left behind the barrier, watching as Artorias was dragged deeper into the shadows. The young wolf whimpered and scratched at the light, but the barrier was absolute. Sif had to witness the total degradation of a hero. The sacrifice of the shield is why Sif is so protective of the grave in the present day. Sif knows that the shield was the last thing Artorias ever did as a man. The wolf understands the cost of that light. Every time Sif looks at the great sword of Artorias, the wolf is reminded of the man who chose to suffer forever so that Sif could live. This act of sacrifice is what makes the fight with Sif in the Darkroot Garden so painful for the player. You are fighting the survivor of a tragedy that was caused by a love you can never hope to match. Artorias gave everything for Sif. Now, you are coming to take Sif's life for a ring. The sacrifice of the shield is the moral heart of the story. It shows that in the world of Dark Souls, the most powerful thing you can do is give up your power for someone else. Artorias died a failure in the eyes of history, but he died a hero in the eyes of the wolf. After Artorias was consumed by the dark and wandered away, Sif was left alone in the chasm of the abyss. The young wolf survived behind the protective barrier of the Great Shield, but survival in the abyss is its own kind of torture. Sif was trapped in a realm of swirling phantoms and absolute darkness for what felt like an eternity. The barrier was the only thing keeping the corrosive power of Manus at bay. Sif was a prisoner of the light in a cell of shadows. This period of isolation is what forged the solitary, weary guardian that the player meets 1,000 years later. Sif sat behind the shield, guarding the only thing left of the night. The Great Shield became a focal point for the wolf's entire existence. In that dark pit, Sif learned the true meaning of loss. The wolf watched as the city of Ulakaile was wiped from existence and the era of the gods began to crumble. This was not a quick stay. It was a long, slow wait in the dark. Sif grew up in the chasm, maturing from a young pup into a creature of size and intelligence while surrounded by the spirits of the dead. The psychological impact on Sif was profound. The wolf learned that humanity was the source of the abyss, and that the dark was a force that could destroy even the greatest heroes. Sif became a creature of absolute vigilance. The silence of the chasm was only broken by the whimpers of the phantoms and the sound of Sif's own breathing. This environment created a deep-seated fear of the abyss and anyone who might try to seek it out. Sif decided that the secret of Artorias' failure must be kept hidden at all costs. Sif's survival was not a stroke of luck. It was the result of a knight's desperate plan. But for Sif, survival felt like a burden. The wolf was the only living thing that knew the truth about the Abysswalker. Sif was the keeper of the shield and the keeper of the memory. When the player eventually finds Sif in the past, the wolf is whimpering, not out of fear, but out of a profound loneliness. Sif is waiting for a master who is never coming back. The wolf is the last survivor of a war that everyone else has forgotten. The time Sif spent in the chasm is the hidden history of the Darkroot Garden. When you see the great grey wolf in the present, you are seeing a creature that has literally been through hell. Sif's aggression is a defense mechanism learned in the dark. The wolf is not just protecting a grave. Sif is protecting the world from the darkness that consumed Artorias. The survival of Sif is the only good thing to come out of the Ulakaile disaster, and it is the very thing that the player is eventually forced to destroy. When the player travels back into the past through the DLC, the legend of Artorias is stripped away to reveal a harrowing reality. Deep within the chasm of the abyss, hidden behind an illusory wall, you find the young Sif. The wolf is huddled beneath the glow of the great shield of Artorias, surrounded by a swarm of humanity phantoms. Sif is not a majestic guardian here. The wolf is a terrified pup, whimpering and shaking in the dark. Finding Sif in this state confirms the desperate truth of the knight's final moments. The shield was not lost in battle. It was used as a lifeline for a friend. By clearing out the phantoms and reaching the shield, you essentially become Sif's second savior. You break the siege of the abyss that had been pressing against the barrier for an untold amount of time. This interaction establishes a deep, unspoken bond between the player and the wolf. Sif looks at you not with the eyes of a beast, but with the recognition of someone who has just been pulled back from the edge of the void. You are the only person, other than Artorias himself, to show Sif kindness in a world that had become absolute shadow. This encounter is one of the few moments of pure altruism in the game. You don't save Sif for a reward or a quest item. You do it because it is the right thing to do. However, the game uses this kindness to set up a future tragedy. By saving Sif in the past, you are ensuring that the wolf lives long enough to face you in the present. You are preserving a life that you will eventually be required to take. The act of rescue is a beautiful moment of light in the chasm, but it is shadowed by the knowledge of what comes later. After you rescue Sif, the wolf can actually be summoned to fight alongside you against Manos, the father of the abyss. This is a profound narrative beat. Sif stands up and joins the fight against the monster that broke Artorias. It is an act of closure for the wolf. With your help, Sif is able to face the source of its trauma and survive the encounter. This shared victory cements the player's place in Sif's memory. You are the one who finished what Artorias started, and Sif never forgets the scent of the person who stood by them in the dark. Saving young Sif is the emotional pivot of the entire expansion. It proves that the legend of the Abysswalker was built on a foundation of genuine love and sacrifice. It shows that Artorias succeeded in the one thing that mattered most to him, keeping his companion alive. But for the player, this knowledge is a curse. You now know exactly what Sif went through to reach that clearing in the Darkroot Garden. You know the weight of the gratitude the wolf carries for you, which makes the inevitable confrontation in the present day almost unbearable to witness. The primary reason the player must confront Sif in the present timeline is to obtain the Covenant of Artorias ring. This ring is a unique artifact that was granted to the knight so he could walk upon the abyss without being immediately consumed. In the game's mechanics, it is the only way to survive the descent into the abyss of New Londo to face the Four Kings. But in the lore, the ring is a symbol of a catastrophic failure. Sif guards the ring at the base of Artorias' grave, because Sif knows exactly what the abyss did to the man who wore it. Sif's guardianship of the ring is an act of preventive love. The wolf isn't protecting the ring because it is valuable. Sif is protecting you from the ring. Sif understands that anyone who seeks the Covenant is someone who intends to follow Artorias' path into the darkness. From Sif's perspective, the ring is a curse that leads only to madness and death. The wolf has seen the strongest hero in history reduced to a shrieking monster by the abyss. Sif fights you to ensure that no one else ever has to suffer that fate. It is a protective vigil meant to save humanity from itself. The ring is the only piece of Artorias' equipment that Sif managed to bring back to the surface. It represents the last physical connection to the knight's mission. By keeping it at the grave, Sif has created a focal point for their grief. The ring is a reminder of the day the light went out in Ulasiel. Every person who comes to the Darkroot Garden seeking the ring is, in Sif's eyes, another potential victim of the dark. The wolf would rather kill you themselves than let you walk into the void and lose your soul. For the player, the ring is a tool for progression, but for Sif, it is the legacy of a nightmare. The fight is a tragic misunderstanding born of Sif's trauma. The wolf cannot understand your quest to link the fire or save the world. Sif only knows that the abyss is a hunger that cannot be satisfied. By guarding the Covenant, Sif is trying to seal the abyss by preventing anyone from gaining the means to enter it. It is a solitary, desperate attempt to keep the world safe from the horror that claimed Artorias. The irony of the situation is that you need the ring to save the world, But Sif believes that by taking the ring, you are destroying yourself. This creates a conflict where both sides are technically right from their own perspective. You are fighting for the future, but Sif is fighting for your soul. Every swing of Sif's sword is a plea for you to turn back before it's too late. The Covenant of Artorias is not a prize to be won. It is a burden that Sif has carried for 1,000 years, and the wolf will die before letting another person wear it. For a millennium, the Darkroot Garden has served as Sif's sanctuary and prison. The garden is a place where time seems to have slowed down, a remnant of the ancient royal wood of Ulakail. Sif has stood vigil over Artorias' grave for all that time, watching as kingdoms rose and fell around the forest. The great wolf grew massive over the centuries, becoming a legend in its own right among the forest hunters and the locals. But Sif remained solitary. The wolf never sought companionship or power. Sif only sought to maintain the silence of the grave. The vigil is a testament to the absolute nature of Sif's loyalty. 1,000 years is an incomprehensible amount of time to spend in mourning. Sif has watched the trees grow and the stone of the grave weather away. Yet the wolf never left. This is not a mindless animal instinct. It is a conscious dedication to a memory. Sif stayed through the fading of the age, through the rise of the undead curse, and through the slow decay of the world. The clearing at the end of the garden is the only place in Lordran where the old honor of the knights still exists. Sif's presence in the garden is what keeps the memory of Artorias alive, even if that memory is distorted. The world knows Artorias as the hero who walked the abyss, and Sif ensures that his grave is never desecrated by common looters. But the vigil is also a form of penance. Sif was the one who was saved, and the wolf carries the weight of that survival every day. Standing by the grave is Sif's way of remaining close to the person who gave up everything for them. It is a long conversation between a living wolf and a dead knight. The environment of the Darkroot Garden reflects this eternal sadness. The glowing flowers, the moonlit mist, and the silent stone guardians create a dreamlike atmosphere of grief. Sif has become a part of the landscape. The wolf is the soul of the forest. To the forest hunters who follow Alvina, Sif is a sacred figure to be protected. But Sif doesn't care about the hunters or their rules. Sif only cares about the swords in the ground and the ring beneath the soil. The wolf is a creature frozen in time, waiting for a conclusion that finally arrives when you step into the clearing. By the time the chosen undead arrives, Sif is tired. 1,000 years of guarding a lie and a grave have taken their toll. The wolf is a solitary figure in a world that has moved on. The vigil has become a cycle of violence against anyone who approaches. Sif is the last bastion of a lost age, standing in the dark and waiting for the one person who can finally end the watch. The Darkroot Garden is the stage for the final act of a tragedy that started in the Chasm of the Abyss, and the 1,000-year vigil is the long, silent build-up to a heartbreaking end. When you first cross the threshold into the grave clearing, the encounter is framed as a traditional boss battle. Sif leaps down from the top of the monument, a silver blur in the moonlight. The wolf lands with a heavy impact, picks up the greatsword of Artorias, and immediately enters a combat stance. There is no dialogue and no attempt at negotiation. From Sif's perspective, you are just another intruder. You are another human who has come to steal the secret of the abyss. Sif sees the dark within you and assumes that you are a source of the same corruption that destroyed Artorias. Sif doesn't see a hero. The wolf sees a threat. Humanity is chaos in Sif's eyes. Every human who has ever tried to use the power of the abyss has ended up as a monster. Sif has seen the citizens of Ulakail turn into bloated horrors and has seen the greatest knight become a mindless killer. The wolf's aggression is a desperate act of containment. Sif is trying to prevent you from making the same mistake. The battle is a violent expression of Sif's protective instinct. The wolf would rather kill you now than let you succumb to the lure of the dark. The combat itself is beautiful and lethal. Sif moves with a speed that belies its massive size, swinging the great sword in wide, sweeping arcs. The wolf uses the weight of the blade to its advantage, performing somersaults and lunges that are eerily similar to Artorias' own fighting style. It is clear that Sif is fighting with the techniques of its master. Every strike is a reminder of the knight who once held that blade. Sif is not just fighting you with a sword. Sif is fighting you with the memory of Artorias. For the player, the fight is a test of skill. Sif is a formidable opponent, capable of catching you off guard with sudden jumps and powerful spins. The music is epic and tragic, signaling a clash of wills, but there is a disconnect between the player's goal and Sif's intent. You are fighting to progress, to fulfill your destiny as the chosen undead. Sif is fighting to protect your very humanity. The wolf is the only boss in the game who is trying to stop you for your own good. This makes the initial encounter a tragic misunderstanding that can only end in blood. As the fight progresses, the heroic framing begins to crumble. You are the aggressor here. You have invaded a sanctuary of grief to take a ring that doesn't belong to you. Sif is the defender, the loyal companion standing over the bones of a friend. The first encounter is the moment the player is forced to realize that in the world of Lordran, your progress often requires you to destroy the things that are most worth saving. Sif attacks you because the wolf is the only one who truly knows the cost of the path you are taking. This is the most devastating moment in the entire Dark Souls experience. If the player completes the Ulakail DLC and rescues Sif from the Chasm before encountering the wolf in the Darkroot Garden, the standard cinematic is replaced. In this alternate version, Sif leaps down and pins the player to the ground, preparing to strike. But then, the wolf stops. Sif begins to sniff your armor, catching the scent of the person who saved them 1,000 years ago. Sif whimpers, whines, and licks the player's face in a moment of pure, joyful recognition. The joy is short-lived. Sif looks at the massive grave and then back at you, and the weight of duty descends. The wolf lets out a long, mournful howl and looks away in shame. Sif picks up the greatsword with a visible, heavy reluctance. The wolf knows who you are. Sif remembers the chasm and the phantoms and the way you stood between them and the dark. But Sif also knows that the vigil over the grave is a sacred oath. The wolf realizes that to protect Artorias' legacy and your soul, Sif must fight the one person who showed them mercy. This cutscene changes the entire context of the battle. It is no longer a fight against a territorial beast. It is a fight against a heartbroken friend. Sif doesn't want to kill you, and you don't want to kill Sif, but the Covenant requires your death, or Sif's. The wolf is forced by its own loyalty to become your executioner. The whimper Sif lets out before picking up the sword is a sound of absolute despair. It is the realization that in this dying world, even the strongest bonds can be severed by the demands of duty. For the player, the emotional impact is crushing. You are now looking into the eyes of a creature you spent hours rescuing. You have a shared history of violence and survival. The game is asking you to murder your own companion. Sif's reluctance is palpable in every frame of the animation. The wolf moves slower at first, as if hoping you will turn back and leave the garden. The fight becomes a ritual of mutual grief. You are being forced to destroy the very innocence you fought to preserve in the past. The alternate cutscene is a masterclass in tragic storytelling. It rewards the player for exploring the lore with a punch to the gut. It proves that Sif is a sentient, emotional being who has carried your memory for a millennium. The recognition in Sif's eyes is the final confirmation that you are the villain of this story. You are the one who has returned after 1,000 years to finish what the Abyss started. The wolf picks up the sword not out of rage, but out of a tragic, unavoidable necessity. As Sif's health drops below a certain point, the nature of the fight changes in a way that is unique in the series. Sif begins to limp heavily. The wolf can no longer perform the graceful somersaults or the powerful leaps. Every step Sif takes is a struggle. When Sif tries to swing the massive greatsword, the wolf stumbles and falls over, the weight of the blade too much for its broken body to handle. This environmental storytelling is designed to move the player from a state of challenge to a state of profound guilt. You are no longer fighting a boss. You are beating a dying animal. The limp is a visceral reminder of Sif's mortality and exhaustion. After 1,000 years of standing vigil, the wolf is finally at its limit. Sif is fighting through sheer force of will, refusing to let the grave fall even as its legs give out. The animation is clumsy and erratic, showing a creature that is terrified but unyielding. Sif tries to maintain a defensive posture, but the wolf's head hangs low, and its breathing becomes a ragged, wet sound. The great grey wolf has been reduced to a broken, shivering remnant of itself. For the player, this is the point where many people stop fighting. The game forces you to watch the consequences of your quest for power. You have to witness Sif's pain up close. The operatic music continues, but it feels like a mockery of the carnage on screen. You are the one who caused this. You are the one who shattered the legs of the most loyal creature in the world. The limp is a physical manifestation of the price of the Lord vessel. To save the world, you have to break the things that make the world worth saving. Sif's refusal to surrender, even while crippled, highlights the tragic depth of the wolf's character. Sif knows the fight is over. The wolf knows that you are going to win. But Sif cannot allow you to have the ring. The limp is a sign of a duty that transcends physical capability. Sif would rather crawl through the dirt and swing the sword one last time than let the secret of the abyss escape. It is a display of courage that makes your own heroism look hollow and cruel. This mechanic is one of the most effective uses of gameplay to tell a story. It removes the fun of the boss fight and replaces it with a somber, mandatory execution. You cannot walk away. You cannot talk to Sif. You have to keep hitting the wolf until it stops moving. The limp ensures that you are fully aware of the suffering you are causing. It is the moment where Dark Souls stops being a game about winning and starts being a game about the terrible things you have to do to survive. In the final moments of the encounter, Sif stops growling entirely. The aggressive sounds of the predator are replaced by soft, high-pitched whimpers. These are the sounds of a creature that is in absolute agony and knows that the end is near. Sif can barely stand, frequently collapsing under the weight of the greatsword. The wolf's attacks are no longer dangerous. They are the desperate, flailing movements of a dying friend. Sif is whimpering for Artorias, for the past, and perhaps for you. It is the most heartbreaking sound in the entire game. The whimpering forces the player to consciously choose to deliver the killing blow. The game doesn't give you a cinematic finish. You have to walk up to the crippled, crying wolf and press the button to end its life. This lack of distance makes the act feel personal and cold. Sif looks up at you with eyes that are no longer filled with the fire of battle, but with the exhaustion of a 1,000-year wait. The wolf is ready to go, but the duty to the grave is so strong that Sif continues to struggle until the very last drop of health is gone. This vulnerability is a stark contrast to the legendary status of the Abysswalker's companion. It reminds the player that Sif is, at the end of the day, a loyal animal who was caught in a war of gods and shadows. The whimpers are a reminder of the pup you found in the chasm. You are hearing the same sound Sif made when it was huddled under the shield. You have come full circle from the rescue to the execution. The whimper is the sound of innocence being permanently extinguished in the world of Lordran. For many players, this is the moment where the quest feels like a mistake. The ring you are about to get feels heavy and tainted. The whimper echoes in the silence of the clearing, a sound that will haunt the player for the rest of their journey. Sif's death is not a triumph. It is a tragedy that you have authored. The game uses Sif's voice to ensure that you feel the weight of your actions. You are the one who silenced the last song of the forest. The whimpering ends only when Sif finally collapses for the last time. The wolf disappears into a cloud of white soul essence, leaving behind only the ring and the memory of its cry. The silence that follows is the heaviest moment in the game. You stand alone in the clearing, the swords in the ground now serving as markers for your own cruelty. Sif's whimper is the final verdict on the player's morality. You have saved the world, but you have done so by murdering the only creature that truly loved it. The necessity of Sif's death is the ultimate cruel joke of the Dark Souls narrative. You do not kill Sif out of malice or because the wolf is evil. You kill Sif because the game's logic demands a key to the next area. To reach the Four Kings in New Lundo and obtain their fragment of the Lord's soul, you must be able to survive the abyss. The Covenant of Artorias ring is the only way to do this. Sif is the only one who has the ring. Therefore, Sif must die. It is a cold, mathematical requirement that ignores the emotional bond between the player and the wolf. This forced conflict subverts the idea of the hero's journey. In most stories, the hero overcomes obstacles to achieve a noble goal. In Dark Souls, the obstacles are often innocent beings who are just trying to protect what they love. By making Sif's death mandatory, the game forces you to accept that your mission is built on blood. You are the intruder. You are the one who is breaking the rules of the world to extend a dying age of fire. Sif is the speed bump on your road to divinity. The fight with the Four Kings adds a layer of retroactive guilt to Sif's death. When you finally descend into the abyss of New Lundo, you see the horror that Sif was trying to protect you from. The abyss is a place of absolute nothingness, filled with the shrieks of the damned. You realize that Sif's vigil was a mercy. The wolf was trying to prevent you from ever seeing this place. By killing Sif, you have won the right to walk into hell. The ring you took from the wolf's body is the only thing keeping you from being consumed by the same dark that took Artorias. The game uses this requirement to highlight the corruption of the player character. To become the next Lord of Cinder, or the Dark Lord, you must be willing to sacrifice your conscience. Sif's death is the initiation into the true nature of Lordran. It proves that the order of the world is a parasitic thing that requires the death of innocence to survive. You are not a hero. You are a scavenger, picking through the graves of the legendary to find the tools for your own survival. Sif is the most painful price you have to pay. Ultimately, the reason you have to kill Sif is to prove that you are worthy of the dark world you are inheriting. A hero who cannot kill a loyal wolf is a hero who cannot survive the abyss. The game forces you to make a choice: your sympathy or your progress. Most players choose progress, and in doing so, they prove Sif's fears were correct. You have become a creature of the dark, driven by a hunger for souls that is more powerful than your memory of friendship. Sif died to save you from yourself, and you killed Sif to become a god. The grave in the center of the Darkroot Garden is a modest monument that stands in stark contrast to the sprawling cathedrals of Ainur Londo. It is a simple slab of stone, adorned only by the massive greatsword and a few scattered flowers left by those who still respect the old ways. Sif was not guarding gold, nor was the wolf protecting a source of power that could be used to rule the land. Sif was protecting a memory. To the rest of the world, Artorias had become a myth, a hollow name used to bolster the morale of a dying civilization. To Sif, however, Artorias was the man who had shared his last crust of bread and his final breath of safety. The grave was the only place in the entire world where Artorias was still real, and Sif's presence ensured that the silence of the night's rest was never broken by the noise of the present. Sif understood that the legacy of Artorias was built on a tragedy that the history books had rewritten. The legend of the Abysswalker claimed that the night had conquered the dark, but Sif knew that the dark had actually conquered the night. By guarding the tomb, Sif was protecting the dignity of a fallen friend. The wolf didn't want the world to see the broken, blackened armor or the twisted soul that Artorias had become in his final moments. Sif wanted the world to remember the Knight of the Sun, the one who wore the silver armor and fought for justice. The grave was a sanctuary for the truth, a place where the hero's failure was buried deep beneath the earth, protected by a loyalty that transcended the lies of the gods. The swords driven into the ground around the grave are a testament to the thousands of years Sif spent in this clearing. Each blade belonged to an adventurer, a thief, or a desperate undead who tried to claim the treasures of the legendary knight. Sif defeated them all, not out of bloodlust, but out of a defensive necessity. The wolf turned the clearing into a graveyard for those who lacked the respect to leave the dead alone. These swords are the thorns of the grave, a physical warning that the price of desecration is death. Sif was the gardener of this field of steel, ensuring that the only thing that ever touched the tombstone was the moonlight and the occasional falling leaf. In the lore of the forest, Sif's vigil is seen as a sacred duty, but for Sif, it was a heavy, solitary burden. The wolf had no pack, no hunting grounds, and no future beyond the next intruder. Sif's entire identity was subsumed by the grave. The wolf became a creature of pure mourning, a living monument to a lost age. Sif was protecting the last honorable thing in a world that had become fundamentally dishonorable, while the other knights of Gwyn fell to madness, rot, or despair, Artorias' memory remained pure, because Sif refused to let the world touch it. The grave was the anchor that kept Sif from drifting into the same emptiness that had claimed everyone else. When the player arrives and eventually kills Sif, the grave is left unguarded for the first time in a millennium. The silence that follows the fight is the sound of a legacy finally being exposed to the cold, uncaring world. Sif was protecting the memory of the man who saved them, and by removing the protector, the player has turned a sanctuary back into a simple pile of stone and dirt. The tragedy is that Sif was right to be protective. The world didn't need the ring or the legend. It needed the example of a loyalty that could last 1,000 years. By taking the ring from the grave, you have proved that the memory of Artorias is less important to the world than the survival of the individual. The reality of Artorias' fall is hidden away in the past, within the suffocating depths of the Chasm. When the player travels back in time, they don't find the shining hero of the legends. They find a shattered, groaning warrior whose armor is stained a deep, oily black. The silver plates that once reflected the sun are now covered in the sludge of the abyss, and one of his arms hangs uselessly at his side, broken during the struggle to protect his companion. This visual evidence is a direct contradiction to the heroic tales told in the present. Artorias didn't walk the abyss as a master. He was consumed by it as a victim. The armor is a physical record of the moment. The greatest knight of the sun was extinguished by the primordial dark. Finding Artorias' actual equipment in the chasm further highlights the lie that Sif was guarding. The sword you find there is twisted and corrupted, its divine edge dulled by the weight of humanity's sin. It is a cursed blade that demands the blood of the innocent to function. This is the truth that Sif wanted to bury. Sif knew that the hero of Ulakail was actually a man who had lost his mind and his soul. The wolf saw Artorias wandering the ruins of the city, shrieking at the shadows and attacking anything that moved. By guarding the grave in the present, Sif was trying to ensure that no one ever found the corrupted version of the knight. Sif wanted to keep the knight's shame hidden in the past where it belonged. The armor set itself carries a heavy weight for the player. When you wear it, you are wearing the physical manifestation of failure. The item descriptions speak of a knight whose will was indomitable, but the visuals tell a story of a will that was eventually snapped. The armor is jagged and broken, a shell of a man who gave up his shield and his sanity for a wolf. This is the hidden cost of the sacrifice that Artorias made. He didn't just die, he was desecrated. The abyss didn't just kill him, it made a mockery of his vows. Sif's protection of the grave was a desperate attempt to provide the knight with the one thing the abyss took away, his dignity. The presence of the armor in the chasm serves as a dark mirror to the grave in the forest. While the grave is clean and moonlit, the armor is dirty and shrouded in shadow. Sif knew that if the world ever saw the true state of Artorias, the hope he represented would vanish. Sif was protecting a symbol because the reality was too horrific to bear. The wolf was the keeper of the secret that the gods were not invincible, and that even the strongest light could be swallowed by the dark. Every time Sif looked at the great sword in the garden, the wolf was reminded of the blackened, broken blade it had left behind in the pits of Ulakail. By recovering these items, the player becomes the bearer of the truth. You are the one who knows that Artorias fell, and you are the one who knows why. You carry the weight of his corrupted soul and his stained armor into the future. Sif's death was the final lock on this secret, and by killing the wolf, you have opened the floodgates. The tragedy is that the truth doesn't make the world better. It just makes the legend feel like a cruel joke. Sif was protecting a lie, but it was a lie that allowed people to believe in heroes. Without Sif, all that is left is the black armor and the knowledge that even the best of us can be turned into monsters. Part 19. The Wolf Ring, Artorias' bond with Sif. The Wolf Ring is one of the 4 knights' unique treasures granted to Artorias by Lord Gwyn himself. It was designed to boost the wearer's poise, reflecting Artorias' ability to withstand any blow and maintain his focus on the battlefield. But beyond its combat utility, the ring was a profound symbol of his bond with Sif. It represented the spirit of the wolf that defined his fighting style and his personality. To Artorias, the wolf was not just a companion, it was his equal in every sense. The ring was a physical vow of partnership, a reminder that no matter how deep he went into the dark, he was part of a pack. It was the anchor for his indomitable will. When Sif is defeated in the Darkroot Garden, the player receives this ring back. But the context has changed from a symbol of partnership to a trophy of slaughter. You are now wearing the emblem of a loyalty that you were forced to destroy. The ring's effect on your poise feels like a hollow reward when you realize that Sif's own poise was shattered by your blade. The will that the ring represents is now your own, but it is a will that has been stained by the execution of an innocent protector. The wolf ring is no longer about the knight and his wolf. It is about the survivor and the grave he robbed. The lore behind the ring suggests that Artorias' strength came from his connections to others. He was not a solitary warrior by choice, but a man who drew power from his companions. Sif was the source of his resilience. When he gave up his shield to protect Sif, he was giving up the physical manifestation of the ring's power. He chose to lose his poise and his defense so that Sif wouldn't lose their life. The ring is a record of a man who was willing to break for the sake of another. Sif guarded the grave to honor that specific version of Artorias, the one who wore the wolf on his finger and carried the wolf in his heart. For the player, the wolf ring is a tool of efficiency, but for Sif, it was the soul of their master. Sif saw Artorias wear that ring through every battle and every triumph. It was part of his identity. When you take the ring from the clearing, you are stripping the grave of its last bit of character. You are turning the legend of the great grey wolf and the knight into a set of stats in an inventory menu. The ring is a heavy object to wear, not because of its metal, but because of the 1,000-year vigil it represents. It is the final loot of a tragedy, a piece of jewelry that reminds you of a whimpering wolf every time you look at your hand. The wolf ring also serves as a connection to the other knights of Gwyn. Each of them had a ring that defined their essence. The lion, the hornet, the hawk, and the wolf. Artorias was the heart of this group, and Sif was the heart of Artorias. By the time you get the ring, the other knights are gone, and Sif is dead. You are holding the last remnant of a brotherhood that once stood at the center of the world. The tragedy is that the will of the wolf wasn't enough to save Sif from the player. The ring survives, but the spirit of the pack has been extinguished forever. Part 20. Sif's death. The saddest moment in Dark Souls. Sif's death is widely regarded as the most emotionally taxing moment in the Dark Souls series, and for good reason. Unlike many other tragic figures in the game, Sif is a mandatory boss. You cannot bypass the clearing, and you cannot find a way to make peace. The game forces you into a corner where your only choices are to stop playing or to murder a loyal, suffering friend. This lack of agency makes the act feel like a personal betrayal. The combination of the limping animation, the high-pitched whimpers, and the mournful score creates a perfect storm of guilt. You are not just ending a fight. You are ending a life that has been defined by a pure, unyielding devotion. The pacing of the death is what makes it so uniquely cruel. Sif doesn't die in a single, quick strike. The wolf survives long past the point of being a threat. You have to watch as Sif struggles to stand, witness the wolf tripping over its own sword, and hear the sounds of an animal that is clearly in a state of absolute terror and pain. This forces the player to remain in the moment of their own cruelty. You are not allowed to look away. The game demands that you see the consequences of your ambition. Sif's death is the price of the Lord's soul, and the game makes sure you feel every ounce of that cost. What makes Sif's death stand out is the knowledge of the alternate cutscene. If you saved Sif in the past, you know that the wolf recognizes you. You know that Sif is fighting you with a heavy heart, purely because the oath to Artorias is more important than their own survival. This turns Sif into a character of immense moral depth. Sif is the hero of the story, and you are the monster that has come to finish the job that the Abyss started. You are killing the person who saved you, and Sif is killing the person who saved them. It is a circular tragedy where no one wins and everyone loses. The aftermath of the fight is a heavy, stagnant silence. There is no victory fanfare and no sense of triumph. You simply receive the soul of the wolf and the ring, and you are left alone in the clearing. The music fades, leaving only the sound of the wind in the trees. The grave is now just a piece of rock, and the legend of Artorias has lost its last defender. Sif's death is the moment the player realizes that the chosen undead is not a title of honor, but a title of necessity. You are the one who is willing to do the terrible things that no one else can do. Sif's death is the heartbreak of the series, because it subverts the very idea of why we play games. We are used to being the hero who protects the innocent. Dark Souls flips this on its head and makes you the executioner of the only truly innocent creature in the world. Sif died for a friend, and you killed Sif for a key. This fundamental imbalance of values is what stays with players long after they have beaten the game. Sif's death is the final proof that in Lordran, the only thing more powerful than the dark is the cold, calculated requirement of the quest. After you defeat the corrupted Artorias in the Ulasil DLC, you find another witness to the tragedy, Siren, the Lord's Blade. She is one of the 4 knights of Gwyn, a deadly assassin and a peer of Artorias. You find her kneeling in the arena where the knight fell, her head bowed in a state of profound, silent grief. She doesn't attack you. She doesn't demand vengeance. She simply asks for the soul of her fallen comrade so that she can give him a proper burial. Kiaran represents the human side of the legend. She loved Artorias, and her mourning proves that the knight was more than just a symbol of the state. He was a man who was cherished by those who knew him. Kiaran's presence at the grave adds a layer of romantic and professional tragedy to the story. It is heavily implied that she and Artorias shared a bond that went beyond their duties as knights. She is a creature of shadow and precision, yet she is completely undone by the loss of the wolf. By giving her the soul of Artorias, the player is allowing a brief moment of peace in a world of chaos. She places a small bouquet of flowers and 2 small monuments at the site, turning the battlefield into a place of rest. This is the origin of the grave, that Sif will eventually guard for 1,000 years. Ciaran is the one who laid the foundation for Sif's vigil. The tragedy of Ciaran is that she, too, is a victim of the Abyss. While she wasn't corrupted like Artorias, she was left behind by the world. After her mourning is complete, she disappears, leaving only her hornet ring behind. Some believe she died of a broken heart. Others believe she simply faded away as the Age of Fire began to dim. Her rings are eventually found at the grave in the present day, suggesting that she stayed by Artorias' side until the very end. She and Sif were the two loyalists who refused to let Artorias be forgotten. They are the two bookends of his life, the woman who loved the man and the wolf who loved the hero. Ciaran's mourning provides a contrast to Sif's vigil. While Sif guards the grave with a sword and a howl, Ciaran guards it with a silent, graceful sorrow. She shows that the tragedy of Artorias affected everyone who touched his life. Her request for the soul is one of the few moments where the player is asked to perform an act of mercy for another character's emotional well-being. By helping her, you are acknowledging that Artorias' life had meaning beyond his combat utility. You are helping a woman say goodbye to the man she loved. The legacy of Ciaran is tied to the wolf forever. When you fight Sif in the Darkroot Garden, you are standing on the very ground where Ciaran once knelt in the mud. The flowers that Sif protects are the descendants of the ones Ciaran planted. The tragedy of Sif and Artorias is a story of a family that was torn apart by the dark. Ciaran's mourning is the first step in a 1,000-year process of grief. She shows us that Artorias didn't just have a loyal wolf. He had a world of people who would have followed him into the abyss if they could. She is the quiet, human heart of the wolf's tragedy. Part 22. The Legacy. Why Sif's boss fight breaks players. The boss fight with Sif is legendary among gamers, not because of its difficulty, but because of its moral weight. It is a masterpiece of subversion. In most games, a giant monster is an obstacle to be overcome, a source of loot and experience points. But Sif is a character that the player has a personal reason to care about. The game uses the mechanics of the fight, the limp, the whimper, and the alternate cutscene, to strip away the player's sense of righteousness. You are forced to confront the fact that you are the villain of this specific encounter. Sif's legacy is the realization that in the world of Dark Souls, the right path is often the most painful one to walk. The fight breaks players because it turns the act of playing into an act of cruelty. Most people who play video games want to feel like a hero. We want to believe that our actions are making the world better. But Sif's death makes the world definitively worse. You are removing the last vestige of pure loyalty from the land. You are killing the only creature that hasn't been corrupted by greed, madness, or hollowed despair. The fight is a mirror that shows the player their own hunger. You need that ring, and you are willing to kill a crying, crippled wolf to get it. This realization is a gut punch that stays with players long after the credits roll. Sif's legacy is also tied to the concept of the unreliable legend. Throughout the first half of the game, you are told that Artorias was the hero who defeated the Abyss. You are encouraged to follow in his footsteps. But through Sif, you learn that the hero was a man who failed and was saved by his pet. The fight with Sif is the moment the myth of Lordran collapses. You are killing the one creature that knows the truth. By murdering Sif, you are participating in the cover-up of the Golden Order's failures. You are taking the tool of the Abysswalker to continue a cycle that Sif knows is doomed. The emotional resonance of Sif has led to a massive community legacy. There are countless pieces of fan art, lore videos, and discussions dedicated to the wolf and his knight. Sif has become the symbol of the innocence of the Dark Souls universe. The fight is cited as the primary reason why players feel a sense of melancholy rather than triumph when they beat the game. Sif didn't just guard a grave, Sif guarded the player's conscience. Once Sif is dead, that conscience is gone, and you are free to walk into the dark and burn the world to ash. Sif's boss fight is the ultimate test of the player's empathy. The game knows that you will kill the wolf because you want to finish the game. It uses your own gamer instinct against you, making you the agent of a tragedy you claim to hate. Sif's legacy is the heavy feeling in your chest when you pick up the Covenant of Artorias. It is the sound of a whimper that echoes in every boss room you enter afterward. Sif is the boss that no one wanted to fight, and the boss that no one will ever forget. The wolf is the heartbeat of the tragedy of Lordran. In the unused game data and early design documents for Dark Souls, there is evidence that Sif's role was intended to be even more significant and interactive. There were plans for Sif to be a summon for the battle against Manos, the father of the Abyss in the DLC. While this was eventually moved to a hidden mechanic, the idea was that the young wolf would physically help the player defeat the monster that had broken its master. This would have created a direct narrative arc of vengeance and closure for Sif. It would have allowed the wolf to reclaim its dignity and participate in the destruction of the very darkness that had taken Artorias. This unused content suggests that the developers wanted Sif to be a true protagonist of the Ulukil story. Sif was not just a victim to be rescued, but a warrior who was ready to stand beside the player. If Sif had been a standard summon, the bond between the player and the wolf would have been even stronger. You would have fought together, survived the dark together, and celebrated the victory over the abyss together. This would have made the later fight in the Darkroot Garden even more horrific. The game would have moved from saving a pup to betraying a brother in arms. The idea of Sif as a summon highlights the wolf's indomitable will. Even as a young pup, Sif was ready to face the most terrifying entity in the world for the sake of Artorias. It proves that Sif's combat prowess in the present day was not just a result of size, but a result of experience. Sif had faced a god of chaos and won. The unused data reinforces the idea that Sif is the real hero of the Abysswalker legend. Sif is the one who saw the fight through to the end. The wolf is the Abysswalker who actually survived the walk. This hidden history adds a layer of lost potential to the tragedy. It shows that Sif and the player were meant to be a legendary team. You were the new pack for the wolf. But the game's final version chose a more subtle and heartbreaking path. By making Sif's help a hidden, optional encounter, the game makes the discovery of the wolf's loyalty feel more personal to the player. It isn't a scripted event, it's a secret bond. The unused content is a reminder of the happy ending that could have been. A world where the wolf and the knight, you, saved the day and lived to tell the tale. But in Dark Souls, there are no happy endings. The unused content is a ghost of a different world. In the world we have, Sif is a solitary guardian who is eventually murdered by the person they once helped. The idea of Sif as a summon makes the limp and the whimper even harder to watch. You are killing the creature that stood at your side when the darkness was at its thickest. Sif helped you kill a god, and you killed Sif for a piece of jewelry. The unused content is the final twist in the knife of the tragedy. Part 24. Final verdict. The loyal wolf who never forgot Sif is the embodiment of absolute, unyielding loyalty in a world defined by betrayal and decay. While the gods of Anor Londo fled their responsibilities, while the humans of the world turned into mindless shells, and while the other knights of Gwyn were lost to their own ambitions, Sif remained at the grave. The wolf never left the clearing. Sif never sought a new master or a new purpose. For 1,000 years, Sif's entire existence was centered around the memory of a single man. Sif is the conscience of Lordran, a creature that refused to move on from a time when honor still mattered. The tragedy of Sif is that this loyalty was ultimately a death sentence. Sif's devotion to Artorias is exactly what led to the wolf's destruction at the hands of the player. If Sif had been less loyal, the wolf might have survived. If Sif had been willing to let the grave be robbed, the wolf could have lived another 1,000 years. But Sif's character was absolute. Sif would rather die protecting a friend's memory than live in a world where that memory was desecrated. This makes Sif the most heroic figure in the game, but also the most tragic. The wolf's virtue was the weapon that killed it. Sif never forgot the scent of the savior or the love of the knight. The wolf carried the trauma of the chasm and the joy of the rescue for an eternity. This permanence of memory is a rare thing in a land where most people cannot remember their own names. Sif was the keeper of the truth in a land of lies. The wolf knew that Artorias was not a god, but a man who had sacrificed himself for a pup. This private history is what made Sif's vigil so powerful. Sif wasn't guarding a king, Sif was guarding a best friend. The fight with Sif is the definitive Dark Souls experience. It is a moment that forces the player to question why they are playing and what they are willing to do to win. Sif is the obstacle that makes you hate yourself for overcoming it. The wolf's death is a mandatory step in the quest, proving that the path to the end of the world is paved with the bodies of the innocent. Sif is the most tragic guardian in gaming history, because the wolf's only crime was being too loyal to a world that had already abandoned it. Ultimately, Sif is the spirit of the wolf that Artorias always claimed to represent. The knight gave his shield to save the wolf, and the wolf gave its life to save the knight's honor. It is a perfect, circular sacrifice that leaves only the player standing in the center. As the dust settles in the Darkroot Garden, the tragedy is complete. The wolf who never forgot is now a memory himself. Sif's story is a reminder that in a world of darkness, the only true light is the loyalty we show to those we love. Sif died at the base of the grave, the most faithful companion the world has ever known.